daughter-in-law and her mother tried to force us out. My son and I took the entire roof off. That morning, I found the papers on my own kitchen table before I'd even had my coffee. My daughter-in-law slid them across the counter and said, "Sign here, Dorothy. It's just easier this way." I read every line. Then I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Enjoy the house while it lasts." I sighed nothing. I made one phone call. 3 weeks later, they learned exactly whose name was really on that deed. If you're new here, stick around, because this is the story of how my daughter-in-law and her mother tried to steal a house that was never theirs to take, and how a 73-year-old widow who spent 30 years reading fine print for a living made sure they paid for every single page. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. My name is Dorothy Sullivan. Everyone who loves me calls me Dottie. I'm 73 years old, and I've lived in this house on Rutledge Avenue in Charleston for 46 years. My late husband, Frank, and I bought it the year after we got married, back when the paint was peeling and the porch sagged in the middle like a tired old mule. We spent our whole lives fixing it up, plank by plank, room by room. We raised our son, James, in this house. I held Frank's hand in the upstairs bedroom the night he passed, 6 years ago now, and I have not spent one single night away from this place since, because it is the last room I ever shared with him. For 30 years before I retired, I worked as a title examiner for a regional title insurance company. My job was simple on paper and murderously detailed. In practice, I read deeds. I read wills. I read trusts, liens, easements, and every scrap of paperwork that decided who legally owned what and why. I have seen more fraudulent signatures than most attorneys see in a career, because foragers get lazy right around the third or fourth document, and lazy people leave fingerprints. That skill will matter a great deal, sooner than I expected. My son James is 44. He married Jennifer Miller 9 years ago. I liked Jennifer well enough at the wedding. She was polished, ambitious, quick with a compliment. It took me about 2 years of marriage to realize the compliments were currency, not affection, and that she spent them exactly where they'd buy her something. They have a daughter, my granddaughter Grace, who is 7 years old, and the only reason I put up with as much as I did for as long as I did. Jennifer's mother is a woman named Barbara Miller. Barbara had been divorced twice, had gone through most of 2 separate settlements, and had landed 3 years ago in my son's guest bedroom. Just until she got back on her feet, she never left. Barbara has a gift for making herself indispensable and unbearable in the exact same breath. She reorganizes other people's kitchens. She corrects other people's grammar. And from the very first week she moved in with James and Jennifer, she started talking about the Rutledge house like it already belonged to her daughter. It started small, little comments over Sunday dinners. "Dottie, this house is just so much house for one person. Wouldn't it be wonderful for Grace to grow up here instead of that crammed condo? You know, at your age, you really shouldn't be climbing those stairs alone." I smiled through every single one of them, because I have dealt with far more sophisticated manipulators than a twice-divorced woman with main character energy and an opinion about my staircase. Then, 4 months ago, it stopped being small. I was sitting on my own front porch on a warm Saturday morning, drinking my coffee and reading the paper, when James's car pulled into my driveway. Jennifer got out first. Barbara got out second. James got out last, and I noticed immediately that he wouldn't meet my eyes. That should have told me everything. Jennifer walked up my porch steps, holding a leather folder against her chest like a shield. "Dottie," she said, "we need to talk about your future." "My future looks fine from where I'm sitting," I said, not putting down my coffee. She opened the folder anyway, and set a thick stack of papers on the little table between my rocking chairs. "We've been talking to an elder care consultant," she said. "Given everything your age, living alone, the upkeep on a house this size, we think it makes the most sense for you to give the house to James and me now, while you're still healthy enough to enjoy the transition. We'll set you up beautifully at Magnolia Grove. It's a lovely assisted living community, really it is. You'd have your own little apartment. No stairs, no yard work, no worries." I looked at the papers. It was a deed transfer, already drafted, already notarized with a blank signature line, waiting for mine, conveniently pre-filled with my name and the property's legal description. Someone had done their homework. "And where," I asked, still calm, "does Barbara fit into this beautiful plan?" Barbara, standing at the bottom of the steps with her arms crossed, answered for herself. "I'll be moving in to help Jennifer with the transition, of course. Someone needs to be there for Grace while her parents get the house ready." There it was. Not a retirement plan. A real estate acquisition with a nursing home attached as the exit door for me. I set my coffee cup down very deliberately on the little table, right next to their folder. "James," I said, looking past the two of them straight at my son, "do you have anything to say about this?" James shifted his weight, looked at his shoes, and mumbled something about how it might really be for the best. "Mom, and how Jennifer's just trying to think ahead for the family." My son, who are raised to speak his own mind, was borrowing someone else's voice to talk to his own mother. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. Panic is a luxury, and clarity is a discipline, and 30 years of reading other people's fraud had trained the panic clean out of me a long time ago. I picked the papers back up, straightened the edges, and handed them back to Jennifer. "I'll think about it," I said sweetly. Jennifer smiled, thinking she'd won. Barbara smiled wider, thinking she'd already picked out curtains. They had no idea what those 4 words actually meant, coming from a woman who used to catch 6-figure fraud for a living. I did not think about it. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I was simply buying myself time to watch what they'd do next, because I have learned that the second most valuable thing in any investigation, right after the evidence, is patience. I let 2 weeks pass. In that time, Jennifer dropped by 3 more times, each visit a little less friendly than the last. Each visit ending with another gentle reminder about Magnolia Grove and how there was a waiting list and how I really shouldn't delay. Barbara started showing up too, walking through my rooms with a tape measure, murmuring things like this: "Wall could come out and we'd repaint the whole downstairs." Obviously, she measured my dining room like she already owned it. She stood in my kitchen, the kitchen where I taught my son to make his grandmother's biscuits, and told me the cabinets were dated. I let her measure. I let her plan. I smiled and served her sweet tea and let her believe every square foot of my life was already hers. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, James called me, sounding strange and tight. "Mom," he said, "Jennifer wants to know if you've signed the papers yet. She says, if you haven't decided by Friday, we're going to need to talk to a lawyer about your competency." Competency. That word landed like a slap. My son, using the word competency about his own mother, who still balanced her own checkbook to the penny and remembered every birthday in a family of 40 relatives. "Tell Jennifer," I said, my voice perfectly level, "that I have already talked to a lawyer." I hung up before he could ask which one. Here's the thing: my daughter-in-law and her mother never bothered to learn about me because they never once asked a single real question about my career. When Frank was first diagnosed with his heart condition 11 years ago, long before he passed, the two of us sat down with our attorney, a longtime family friend named Robert Anderson, and we restructured our entire estate. We did not do it because we distrusted James. We did it because I had spent 3 decades watching families get torn apart by exactly this kind of scheme, and I refused to let it happen to mine. Even if the threat one day came from inside my own front door, we placed the Rutledge Avenue house into an irrevocable trust. Frank and I were named as beneficiaries for our lifetimes. The trust document specified, and the kind of ironclad language I used to hunt for in other people's paperwork, that the property could not be sold, gifted, mortgaged, or transferred by any individual, not even by me, without the unanimous written consent of the trust's 3 co-trustees. I was one trustee, Robert Anderson was the second, and the third, chosen specifically because Frank and I trusted his judgment completely, was my old college roommate's son, a probate attorney in Columbia who had never once met James, Jennifer, or Barbara Miller, and therefore had absolutely no reason to be charmed by any of them. In other words, I had not personally, legally owned that house since 11 years before Jennifer Miller Sullivan ever set foot on my porch with a notarized deed transfer and a fake smile. Any signature I put on that document would have been worth exactly nothing because I did not have the legal authority to give away what I did not fully own. Jennifer had drafted an entire real estate transaction on a foundation of sand, and she had no idea. I picked up my phone and called Robert Anderson myself. "Robert," I said, "it's Dottie." There was a pause, then a low chuckle on the other end. "They're finally trying it, are they?" "They're finally trying it. Say no more. I'll have the formal notice drafted by tomorrow morning." The trust had one more feature I hadn't mentioned yet. One Frank had insisted on with a mischievous glint in his eye that I still miss every single day. A clause stating that if any beneficiary or their family attempted to coerce, pressure, or defraud the primary beneficiary, meaning me, into transferring, encumbering, or vacating the property, that party's future interest in the trust would be permanently and irrevocably forfeited. Frank used to call it the poison pill. I used to tell him he'd been reading too many legal thrillers. He used to tell me that people show you who they are the minute real money is on the table, and he wanted us protected either way. Frank, God rest him, you beautiful paranoid man. You are right, but a forfeiture clause is only useful if you can prove the coercion actually happened. A written notarized deed transfer sitting untouched in a folder is suspicious, but it isn't proof of pressure. I needed something more. I needed them, in their own words, admitting exactly what they were doing and why. So I did something I am not particularly proud of, and something I would do again in a heartbeat. I called my grandson's old babysitter, a sharp young woman named Chloe, who now ran a small home security installation business, and I had her install 2 discrete cameras in my living room and my kitchen, the 2 rooms where Jennifer and Barbara always insisted on just chatting during their visits. Small, legal, clearly disclosed on a little sign by my front door that most people never bothered to read. South Carolina is a one-party consent state for recording conversations in your own home, and I made very sure of that fact before Chloe ever touched a screwdriver. I was not going to build my defense on the same shaky legal ground they'd built their offense on. Then I waited. I did not have to wait long. Barbara came by that Thursday, alone, while James was at work and Jennifer was picking Grace up from school. She let herself in with a spare key. James had given her a key, I noted with great interest, since I had never given her one myself, and settled into my kitchen like she already owned it, because in her mind, she already did. "You know, Dottie," she said, pouring herself a glass of my sweet tea without asking, "the sooner you sign those papers, the sooner we can get the renovation started. Jennifer's already talked to a contractor about knocking out that wall between the kitchen and the dining room. Open concept. Very modern." "Is that so?" I said. drying a dish at the sink. My back partially to the camera, mounted innocently on top of my refrigerator. "Between you and me," Barbara continued, warming to her subject the way she always did when she thought no one important was listening. "I told Jennifer from the start, the fastest way to handle this is just to make her think it's her idea to leave. Old people get stubborn if you push too hard, but if you make them feel like Magnolia Grove is some big luxury upgrade, they practically move themselves." My mother-in-law fought me on this exact thing for a year with my second husband's family, and you know what worked? Threatening the competency hearing. Nobody wants their whole family standing up in a courtroom, saying they're losing their marbles. Dottie will cave. They always cave. I nearly dropped the plate in my hands, not from shock, I'd suspected as much for weeks, but from the sheer, arrogant carelessness of saying it out loud. In my kitchen, on a recorded Thursday afternoon. "And if she doesn't cave?" I asked, keeping my voice mild, playing my part. Barbara laughed, actually laughed, and took another sip of my tea. "Then we filed the competency petition for real. James won't fight me on it. He never fights his wife on anything anymore, bless him. Once we've got guardianship, the house is basically ours anyway, deed or no deed. It's just a matter of time, Dottie. It's always just a matter of time with people your age." I finished drying that dish very slowly, memorizing every word, and thanked God silently for Chloe's steady hands with a screwdriver. 2 days later, Jennifer came by on her own and gave me a second gift, almost as valuable. She sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, and mentioned casually the way people mention things they've stopped being careful about because they think they've already won. That she'd found the perfect buyer for the house. Once the transfer went through, a developer friend of a friend was interested in converting the property into short-term rental units and had offered nearly double the market rate, specifically because historic homes on Rutledge Avenue almost never came up for sale. We'd clear enough to pay off our mortgage completely and still have money left for Grace's college fund, Jennifer said, not even looking up from her phone. "It's really the smart move, Dottie. You'll thank us." I never had any intention of thanking them, but I did thank Chloe's little cameras, silently, every single night that week, for capturing every smug, careless word. By the following Monday, I had 2 things sitting on Robert Anderson's desk: a formal notice, drafted under the terms of an ironclad, irrevocable trust, informing James, Jennifer, and Barbara that any transfer of the Rutledge Avenue property required unanimous trustee consent that would never, under any circumstances, be given, in roughly 40 minutes of clear, high-definition audio and video of Barbara Miller and Jennifer Miller Sullivan calmly discussing, in explicit detail, their plan to coerce an elderly woman out of her own home through manufactured competency claims and psychological pressure. Robert read through the recordings twice, then looked up at me over his glasses with an expression somewhere between admiration and genuine alarm. "Dottie," he said, "this isn't just a failed real estate scheme anymore. Depending on how a prosecutor wants to read it, this edges into attempted elder financial exploitation and conspiracy to defraud. That's a criminal statute in this state, not just a civil matter." "I know exactly what statute it is, Robert," I said. "I spent 30 years reading the fine print under exactly that kind of law. So what do you want to do? File criminal charges?" I thought about James's face on the porch that day, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, the way he'd let his wife's mother measure my dining room for a wall she planned to tear down. My son was weak in this particular moment, but he was not a co-conspirator. He was a bystander who'd been quietly steamrolled in his own marriage. I did not want to destroy him, to punish the women who were using him. No, I said slowly. Not charges. Not yet. I want them to move forward. I want them to actually try to take this house. And I want them standing on my front porch, boxes in hand, in front of witnesses, when they find out exactly how far they didn't get. Robert leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. You want to let it play out. I want them to feel like they've already won, I said. That's when people get the sloppiest. Jennifer's already talking to developers about property she doesn't own. Let her keep talking. 3 more weeks passed. During that time, I played my part beautifully. I let Jennifer believe I was coming around. I let Barbara keep measuring rooms. I even let them show me a brochure for Magnolia Grove, nodding along at photos of the little apartment with a walk-in shower, thanking them for thinking of me, while inside I was counting down the days until the trap I'd built 11 years ago and reinforced in the last month finally closed. Jennifer set a moving date. She told me with real excitement in her voice that she'd already scheduled a moving crew, already put down a deposit on a unit at Magnolia Grove using money from a joint account she and James shared, already told her. Developer contact, the property would be cleared and ready to list within the month. She was so confident in the deed transfer she'd drafted that she had never once actually confirmed with the county recorder's office whether the transfer could legally proceed. Sloppy, arrogant, exactly what I was counting on. On the morning of the move, I woke up early, made a full pot of coffee, and sat on my front porch in my favorite rocking chair, waiting. At 9 o'clock sharp, a moving truck rounded the corner onto Rutledge Avenue and parked crookedly in front of my house. Behind it came Jennifer's SUV, and behind that, James's car. Barbara got out of the SUV first, practically skipping toward my front steps with a clipboard in hand, already directing the moving crew toward my antique furniture like a general, deploying troops. Jennifer climbed out next, dressed like she was attending a real estate open house rather than evicting her own mother-in-law, and behind her, my granddaughter Grace climbed out too, confused and quiet, clutching her stuffed rabbit. James got out last. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had stopped recognizing his own life somewhere along the way. I stood up from my rocking chair, coffee cup still in hand, and let them get all the way up my front walk before I said a single word. Good morning, I said pleasantly. Barbara barely glanced at me. Morning, Dottie. Movers are here, so we'll just get started, if that's all right. James, honey, can you show them where the big pieces are? Actually, I said, before anyone touches a single piece of furniture in this house, I think we should all step inside and have a conversation. Something in my tone finally made Jennifer pause. Barbara did not. She waved a hand at the moving crew and said, Go ahead and start with the porch furniture. Boys, we don't need to wait around. I would strongly recommend they wait, said a calm voice from the sidewalk behind them. Robert Anderson was walking up my front path, briefcase in hand, dressed in a suit despite the Saturday morning heat. He'd been parked down the block for the last 20 minutes, waiting for exactly this moment. Who is this? Jennifer demanded. This is Robert Anderson, I said, my attorney, and the co-trustee of the Rutledge Avenue Family Trust, which has held legal title to this house since 2015, which means, Jennifer, that the deed transfer you drafted 3 months ago was never worth the paper it was printed on, because I have not personally owned this house in 11 years, and I never once had the legal authority to sign it away to you. The clipboard slipped a fraction of an inch in Barbara's hand. Jennifer's mouth opened, then closed again. You're lying, Barbara said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. James, is she lying? James, standing frozen on the front walk, said nothing at all, which told everyone present everything they needed to know. I'm not lying, I said, and I'm not finished. Robert, if you would, Robert opened his briefcase and produced a formal letter, already delivered by certified, mailed to James and Jennifer's address the previous week, though clearly neither of them had opened it, or they wouldn't be standing on my porch with a moving truck idling behind them. He read the relevant portion aloud, his voice carrying easily across the quiet street, where two of my neighbors had already stepped out onto their own porches, drawn by the commotion. Pursuant to Section 4.3 of the Sullivan Family Trust, he read, any beneficiary or party acting on a beneficiary's behalf who attempts to coerce, pressure, threaten, or defraud the primary life beneficiary, Dorothy Sullivan, into vacating, transferring, or encumbering trust property shall forfeit any and all future beneficial interests in said trust, effective immediately upon documented proof of such conduct. Documented proof, I repeated, looking directly at Barbara. You remember our conversation in my kitchen a few weeks back, Barbara? About making old people think Magnolia Grove is their own idea? About the competency hearing being just a matter of time? The clipboard finally hit the porch floor. You recorded me, Barbara said, her face draining of color. I did, I said, legally, with proper disclosure, in my own home, which South Carolina allows. And Jennifer, you were kind enough to mention your developer friends offer right at this very kitchen table, discussing a sale of property you never had any right to sell in the first place. That's on video too. Jennifer's confident real estate agent posture had completely collapsed. She turned to James, grabbing his arm. Tell her this is insane. Tell her we're your family. James finally looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw something in his eyes that looked like my actual son again. The boy I raised, the boy who used to help. Frank bowed the porch swing that still hangs at the end of this very walk. Mom, he said quietly, is it true? What? Barbara said. In the recording? Every word I said. I have it all, Jamie. Every single conversation. I let this go on for weeks because I needed to know exactly who was steering this ship, and I needed proof strong enough that nobody could ever argue their way around it later. Your wife's mother has spent 3 years living rent-free in your gas bathroom, planning how to take my house out from under me and sell it to a stranger for a profit. And your wife helped her every step of the way. James turned to Jennifer. The color that had drained from Barbara's face now drained from his. Is that true? He asked her, directly. The developer? You were already planning to sell my mother's house before we'd even legally taken it. Jennifer opened her mouth to deny it, but the moving crew, who had heard every word of this exchange, standing awkwardly by their idling truck, chose that exact moment to speak up. Ma'am, one of them said to Jennifer, we were told this was a confirmed sale, and we'd be loading for a listing photo. Shoot next week. You want us to keep unloading equipment or not? There it was, out of the movers' own mouths, confirmation that Jennifer had already arranged to stage and photograph a house she had never legally owned for sale that could never have legally closed. Under the terms of the trust, the forfeiture clause activated. The instant Robert filed the documented proof with the trust's other co-trustee that afternoon, Jennifer, and, by extension through her marriage claims, any future interest James might have hoped his wife could bring into their household through my estate, was permanently severed. The house would remain solely mine for my lifetime, then pass, exactly as Frank and I always intended, directly and irrevocably, to James and Grace, with no possible pathway for Jennifer or Barbara to ever touch it, sell it, or borrow against it. No matter what happened in the marriage going forward, Barbara did not get off with just a forfeited beneficial interest. Robert had already consulted separately with a colleague at the county solicitor's office about the recorded conversations, And while I ultimately declined to pursue formal elder exploitation charges for Chris's sake, and honestly, for whatever fragile scrap of my son's marriage might still be worth saving, the mere threat of that recording circulating was enough. Barbara moved out of James and Jennifer's house within the month, ashamed enough, finally, that Charleston stopped feeling comfortable for her, and last I heard, she'd relocated to be near her sister in Georgia, where, presumably, there are new floor plans to measure and new relatives to plan around. Jennifer stayed. James stayed with her, for Grace's sake, though something between them never quite recovered, and I suspect it never will. She still comes to Sunday dinners. Quieter now, careful now, no longer commenting on my staircase or my kitchen cabinets. She has never once mentioned Magnolia Grove again. 6 months have passed since that Saturday morning on my front porch. I still live in this house on Rutledge Avenue. The porch swing Frank built still creaks in exactly the same spot it always has. Grace comes by every Wednesday after school, and we bake her great-grandmother's biscuit recipe together in my dated kitchen cabinets, which, for the record, I have absolutely no intention of ever renovating. James and I talk more now than we have in years. He apologized to me properly, sitting right here on this porch, for letting fear of conflict in his own marriage cost him his backbone. With his own mother, I told him what I've always believed. That respect isn't something you inherit by blood. It's something you rebuild, brick by brick. The same slow way Frank and I rebuilt this old sagging house 46 years ago. They came from my roof, thinking an old woman living alone was an easy foundation to knock over. They forgot that some foundations are poured in irrevocable concrete, filed at the county courthouse, and witnessed by attorneys who never once needed to raise their voice to win. I'm 73 years old, and my life is not winding down. It's just been properly recorded, notarized, and permanently protected.